It began in a house no one wanted to inherit, a farmhouse once white, now the color of rot. The paint curled like skin under heat, and the windows never stopped rattling, even on windless nights. Locals said the earth there was wrong, soft and wet, like it hadn't finished swallowing what lay beneath. In the summer of 1947, a girl appeared on that porch. Barefoot, swollen, breathing heavy, as if she'd been running for miles. No one knew where she'd come from, but her eyes told a story her lips refused to. She was pregnant, and she was alone. The town doctor came once. He asked her name, but she only whispered something that sounded like home. He asked about the father. Her silence was so long it became an answer. They say he left that house shaking, muttering about things not meant for daylight. Months passed. No one saw her in town again, but at night there were lights in the windows, sometimes the faint sound of singing, old hymns, off-key, as if remembered by someone who'd forgotten what words meant. Then one morning the singing stopped. The sheriff went up the hill. He found the door open, the floor stained, and the bed still warm. The girl was gone. So was the child. Only a single handprint remained on the wall, too small to belong to her, and too twisted to belong to anyone else. The case was never filed. The town simply learned not to ask, but stories have a way of lingering, like smoke caught in the rafters. 75 years later, when the property was finally sold at auction, the new owners found a box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were old photographs, brittle as moth wings. Each one showed the same face, the same child, growing older in every picture, though the backgrounds never changed. And in the last photo, taken decades after the girl vanished, the child was still only about 6 years old. They say blood remembers, even when people forget, and some families are better left buried. The photographs were studied by experts, though no one claimed them publicly. The emulsion was consistent with film from the late 1940s. Yet the last print, somehow, used a brand of paper not manufactured until 1972. The house had no electricity by then. No camera equipment was ever found. But the faces, the girl, the child, they were undeniable. Same lips, same eyes, the same distant gaze that looked more like memory than life. People began to speculate. Some said it was a hoax, a cruel trick played by the town's youth to stir up fear. But the locals knew better. They remembered the old family who owned that land, the Delaneys. Their bloodline stretched back before the Civil War. Men who married cousins, cousins who became mothers, and children who never left the valley. By the 1930s, the last Delaneys were almost feral, living in isolation, surviving on what they could hunt, speaking in half-forgotten English mixed with something older. Records show that the pregnant girl was likely the last of them, though her birth certificate lists no father, and under mother the name is the same. When researchers tried to trace her ancestry, the documents folded in on themselves. One census listed the same man 3 times under 3 different relations: father, husband, and son. Another record had been scratched out entirely, as though someone didn't want the truth to remain legible. The more they searched, the more contradictions appeared. It was as if the town itself had agreed silently to erase whatever the Delaneys had done up there. But in hidden archives, in boxes of brittle county records, there were signs that the girl had been pregnant twice before. Both births unregistered, both infants lost. What they found next, an unsent letter tucked inside a hymnal, changed everything. It was written in uneven script, as if by someone who taught themselves to write in secret. "I can feel it moving again," it read. "It knows me. It knows my thoughts. It says it's been here before, and that I was born wrong." The handwriting matched the girl's. The date, 1 week before she disappeared. When the letter was authenticated, the town should have stopped digging, but curiosity has always been a crueler curse than ignorance. An amateur historian named Thomas Reeve went to the property to document the remnants of the Delaney homestead. He took photographs, measured the layout, catalogued every scrap of furniture. What he found beneath the floorboards of the bedroom made him abandon the project entirely. It wasn't bones, though he'd been expecting that. It was a nest. Layers of dried grass, bits of cloth, and something like animal fur, matted and shaped into a hollow big enough for a child. The wood beneath it was smooth, polished by movement, as if something had lived there for a very long time. Reeve left that same night. The next morning, his notes were found burned in a barrel behind the county records office. A few weeks later, he gave one final interview. His hands shook through the entire recording. It wasn't just inbred, he said. It wasn't even human anymore. It was remembering itself through her. When pressed to explain, he refused. Some families rot inward, he whispered, until there's nothing left but the shape of what they were supposed to be. The Delaney name disappeared from local conversation after that, but the photographs remained, circulating in small collector circles, traded quietly for thousands of dollars each. They say if you look long enough at the child's eyes, you can see another face reflected there. Older, hidden behind her like a shadow waiting to be born again. Years later, during a renovation of the farmhouse foundation, workers unearthed an iron crib, fused with rust. Inside was a single object, a lock of hair so pale it seemed almost white, wrapped around a fragment of mirror. When tested, the hair's DNA sample returned impossible results. Markers looping back on themselves, sequences repeating like a name wisp, erred endlessly in a closed room. The report was sealed. The lab technician quit 2 days later, citing personal distress. No one speaks the Delaney name anymore. But the photographs, they keep showing up. Online, at estate sales, in antique stores where the owners don't remember ever having bought them. Always the same child, always 6 years old, always looking slightly closer to whoever's holding the picture. And in the last photo, for the first time, there are 2 shadows on the wall. A federal archivist years later stumbled upon an unlabeled file while digitizing state health records from the 1950s. Inside were 2 photographs she recognized immediately, the same pale child, the same rotted farmhouse. But these had never been in public circulation. Attached was a brief typewritten note stamped, "Confidential, Genetic Aberration Study, Region 12. No names, just an instruction. Cease interviews. Subject terminated." The archivist tried to trace the file's origin. It led nowhere. The agency listed on the letterhead had been dissolved decades ago, its records destroyed in a warehouse fire. Yet something strange began to happen after she opened that file. Her computer screen flickered, froze, and displayed a single image. The child's face, distorted, the mouth open wider than anatomy should allow. The IT department called it a glitch. But when they replaced her hard drive, the same photo appeared again. Locals whispered that the Delaney bloodline wasn't just inbred, it was recursive. Something in that family had looped back too far, past the human frame, until the body could no longer hold what it remembered. The girl's pregnancy, they said, wasn't conception. It was recurrence. An echo birthing its own origin. A genealogist named Howard Carter published a paper in 1983 claiming that the Delaneys were carriers of a genetic feedback mutation, a closed-loop heredity that caused extreme physical and cognitive distortion over generations. His work was dismissed as pseudo-anthropology, but 3 months later, his home burned to the ground. The fire started in his study. Investigators found every file intact except one, the Delaney report, which had been reduced to ash. The property remains fenced off now, government-owned, no trespassing. But satellite imagery shows something unsettling, faint circular depressions in the soil, as though something large beneath the ground is slowly turning over in its sleep. And yet, when you walk the ridge above the old Delaney farm, you can still hear it, faint humming, like a lullaby sung through teeth, the same melody the girl was heard whispering in 1947, a hymn with no words left. Some say the humming comes from the earth itself, remembering her. Others believe the child never died at all, that it grew and wait still, somewhere between generations, for the next body foolish enough to be born nearby. If you've made it this far, you're already braver than most. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you keep digging or let the grave stay closed? Because this next part is where the story stops sounding like history and starts sounding like a warning. In 2006, a construction crew widening County Route 18 unearthed an old storm drain about half a mile from where the Delaney house once stood. Inside, beneath a layer of silt and broken glass, they found something wrapped in waxed canvas. It wasn't a body, not exactly. It was a collection of small bones arranged carefully, almost ritualistically, in the shape of a cradle. Beneath it was a single note, sealed in glass, the paper near black with age. The handwriting, faint but legible, read, "It wakes when it's remembered." Authorities took the remains for examination. They were never returned. The local paper printed a short paragraph calling it a historical curiosity. But those who worked the dig site remember more. One man claimed he heard crying coming from inside the drain, not loud, just enough to make him stop and listen. Another quit the next day, refusing to speak about what he saw in the mud. Rumors say the bones were reburied in a government facility upstate, but when a journalist filed a Freedom of Information request, the response came back stamped, "No such materials exist," and yet weeks later, a package arrived at his home with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. The child again, unmistakably the same face, same pale eyes, but this time standing in a modern hospital hallway. The timestamp read, 2005. He tried to track where the photo was taken. He couldn't. The walls in the image had no signage, no visible equipment, just that same impossible reflection in the child's pupils. A woman's face this time, older, hollow-eyed, the kind of face you'd recognize in a dream and wish you didn't. That journalist disappeared the following year. His car was found parked near the same county line where the Delaneys once lived. The keys were still in the ignition, the seatbelt buckled, no sign of struggle, just a smear of dried mud on the window. They tested it. The sample came back with 2 distinct DNA profiles, both belonging to him. For decades, the Delaney story survived only in whispers, passed down by people who swore they'd never go near that land again. But history has a strange way of repeating, especially when it's been told to forget. In 2018, a research team from a Midwestern university requested access to the sealed archives. Their stated goal was to document rural genetic collapse in isolated Appalachian communities. Unofficially, they were looking for the Delaney file. 2 months later, they stopped replying to emails. Their equipment, a van full of recording gear, was found abandoned near the old road leading to the farm's ruins. The local sheriff's report described the vehicle as untouched but wrong. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of iron. The dashcam was still recording when the police arrived. The last 30 seconds of footage showed the camera slowly tilting toward the passenger window, as though moved by something just out of view. Then, static. A forensic linguist who reviewed recovered audio said there was a faint voice underneath the interference, a child's voice, whispering a single word again and again, "Mama." The Delaney bloodline officially ended with that girl in 1947. No birth certificates, no surviving relatives, no graves. And yet, DNA fragments found in several nearby counties, unrelated criminal cases, routine screenings, all showed the same impossible markers. The sequence loops. The code repeats. Something is copying itself quietly, across generations, hiding in plain sight. They say the government's containment order was never about the land. It was about the idea that a family could erase the boundary between birth and return, that flesh could remember what it once was, and decide not to stop. Old maps show an underground spring running beneath the Delaney property. Locals call it the Mother's Vein. The water runs red after heavy rain, and nothing grows along its edge. Children dare each other to go near it at night. Those who do often come back quiet, saying they heard singing under the water. The melody is always the same, the same off-key hymn from 1947. And those who stay long enough claim to hear something else, just before dawn. A sound like small fingers tapping from beneath the soil, keeping time with the heartbeat of the earth itself. They say stories die when no one tells them, but some stories don't die. They wait. They wait for a voice to remember their shape, for a breath to carry them back into the world. And every time the Delaney story is told, the silence between words seems to get shorter, like something listening closer each time. In 2021, a county survey drone passed over the ruins of the old farm. The footage was routine until someone slowed it down. Frame by frame, in the corner of one still, there's a figure near the tree line. Small, barefoot, head tilted just slightly upward. The image quality is poor, but the face, it's unmistakable. The same pale skin, the same round eyes, and a faint, impossible smile. They say the photo was analyzed, confirmed authentic, and then deleted from every public database within hours. But you can still find fragments online. Ghost copies shared in backdoor forums, accompanied by the same cryptic message: "She's still 6." When you think about the Delaneys, it's tempting to see them as an anomaly, a tragic byproduct of isolation and decay. But what if they were something else entirely? What if the inbreeding wasn't accident but ritual, a desperate attempt to contain something that should never have existed outside their blood? What if the girl wasn't cursed, but chosen? The hymns she sang weren't lullabies, they were warnings, verses meant to keep whatever was inside her asleep, and when she disappeared, the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was waiting. A few years ago, a park ranger found a small wooden box washed up along the riverbank near the old property line. Inside was a photograph, water-damaged, but clear enough to see 2 figures, a woman and a child standing in the shallows. The woman's face was turned toward the camera, the child's toward her, both smiling. The ranger kept it for a week before turning it in. But before he showed it to a co-worker. She asked what unsettled him most. He said, "I counted the reflections in the water." She asked how many he saw. He said, 3, and then he whispered, "The smallest one was still moving." Maybe that's all the Delaney story ever was, not a tale of birth or blood, but of return. A warning written in flesh, waiting for someone like you to read it. So if you dream tonight of a pale child standing at the foot of your bed, don't speak, don't move. Just remember, she's been waiting a very, very long time for someone to call her home.